One thing to keep in mind when you're working with your client to develop goals is your client's current stage of change. You want to make sure that you select goals and interventions that are appropriate for your client's current level of change or current readiness for change. If you choose goals that are for clients who are in a more advanced stage of change readiness, and your client is simply at the stage of considering change or not committed to or ready for change, they're unlikely to be successful in achieving those goals for a client who's at a higher stage of change. So there are many different change models. Today, we're going to be discussing the Transtheoretical model of change, which is one of the more popular change models. So this theory describes the phases that clients go through as they progress towards change in therapy. The first stage is the pre-contemplation stage. Here, clients are either oblivious to the need for change, or they simply have no intention of changing their behavior in the near future. Now, this stage of change is typical for clients who've been mandated to therapy or who've been at least encouraged by someone else to come to therapy. So they haven't come to therapy because they recognize a problem themselves. Either they've been mandated by law enforcement or somebody in their lives has told them that they need to go to therapy. So your role as a helper at this stage is to help maintain optimism, help them to recognize that change is possible, a more adaptive way of functioning is available to them. You'll want to provide a rationale for change. So work with them to figure out what would be beneficial for me if I were to change. Of course, you always want to convey respect and empathy and examine the pros and cons of changing. Stage 2 would be the contemplation stage. So in this stage, the client is aware that change is needed, but they are not able to do so. So they could lack the skills or the confidence to make the change at this point. Or either they could have the skills, they could have the confidence, but they're just not ready to make the change just yet. They recognize the need for change, but they're not ready to commit to change yet. So they know that change will offer benefits, but they're also aware of the cost involved. And last week, I believe we touched upon the idea of secondary gains, how sometimes there is some benefit to having the problem. So the client may recognize at this stage that they're likely to lose some things if they improve in this problem area. It could affect relationships, or there's some cost involved with changing. So typically at this stage, the client will feel kind of stuck and confused, and they can remain in this stage for months or even years. So your role at this point is to validate the client's ambivalence about change. Let them know that it makes sense that you would be unsure that you want to change if changing could cost you things that are important in your life. You want to continue to explore the pros and cons of change and educate the client about the change process. The fact that sometimes things get worse before they get better, how it could cost them relationships, how they could find their new changes uncomfortable, but ultimately these are the benefits of changing in this particular direction. And you want to increase the perceptions of the advantages of changing. Stage 3 is preparation. So here, your client has made the decision to change in the near future. So in approximately the next month, they see themselves implementing these changes. Because the negative consequences of change are not as great as before, they recognize that, yes, this may result in some losses in some areas, but the benefits, the positives of change outweigh these losses that I may suffer as a result of changing my behavior. So their ambivalence about changing behavior has been resolved. They recognize that a behavior change is necessary. And they may have even begun practicing new behavior in baby steps. So they're kind of experimenting with their new behavior. So here you'll want to define and work toward and evaluate outcomes. So define exactly what behavior changes are you interested in making, what steps toward those things have you already accomplished, and how is that working out for you? What have been some of the benefits and even consequences of the little baby steps you've taken toward change? And then you want to encourage these brief experiments with change. So maybe they're not ready to totally commit to this behavior for a lifetime, but encourage them, well, let's just try this behavior out and see how it goes for you. And the fourth stage is action. Here, your client is actively and deliberately engaged in changing their behavior. And their change in behavior is even noticeable to others. So here you want to help your client develop skills to prevent relapse, help them develop skills to deal with any obstacles that can occur and how they can maintain this behavior and not relapse into their former behavior when they're faced with these challenges. And also you want to review their action plan. So you're constantly revising your plan and seeing if any changes need to be made to their behavior change plan. And then you have stage 5, which is maintenance. Now here your client has continued to engage in their new behavior for more than 6 months, and they've realized the early benefits of change. So they're clearly committed to the change. They've been actively involved in the change for at least 6 months, and they're seeing the benefits of their change in behavior. So here, you'll just want to provide emotional support for their continued change. Now, relapse and recycling can occur. So your client may abandon or sort of lose their progress with their new behavior, and they may even go back to an earlier stage of change. But the person returns to the contemplation stage. They never return to the pre-contemplation stage because they've already recognized that there's a problem. So once they recognize that their behavior needs to change and there's a problem, they can never go back to that first stage where they're oblivious or don't recognize at all that there's any behavior that needs to be changed. And so again, you want to make sure that you select interventions and goals that are an appropriate match for the client's current stage of change or change readiness.